In today's video, I'm going to be making 3 simple from scratch dinner recipes. They are just simple meals that you can throw together in a little bit of time with just a handful of ingredients. So first off, hi and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Haley and I am a stay-at-home mom to 3 little boys that I homeschool. I homeschool the 2 oldest ones. The youngest is just a baby. He's just 2 months old now. And this is a channel where I share homemaking and homeschool related content, just all sorts of things that go on around the home. And I thought that it would be a good time to share a few simple dinner ideas. So I just recently, before this video is going up, posted a video of a grocery haul and then also a video that shows my meal plan for the month of March. And I also talked about just the way that I set up our meal plans. And I just thought a video like this might be helpful to see what kind of simple meals I do make pretty regularly. I know sometimes whenever you're first starting to cook from scratch or just homemade meals, it can be a little overwhelming, especially if you've been using things like, pre-packaged ingredients, maybe like the pre-mixed seasoning blends or things like cream of mushroom soups. It can be overwhelming at times to think about not using those things. And I hope that some of the things I show in this video will just show you that it really is simple and not that time consuming or laborious to replace some of those things with more basic ingredients that you probably already have on hand. It helps from a nutrition standpoint, but also just a budget standpoint. Whenever I'm cooking something on a weeknight, I try to just stick to things that I can make, off the top of my head without having to pull recipes up. So the first thing that I'm making is a sausage potato type of soup or stew. I don't really know what to call it, but basically it is just onion, potatoes, carrots, and I'm using smoked sausage, and I'm going to cook it all down, put some broth in there, and then I will blend up some of the potatoes to thicken it. So it only has a handful of ingredients. That's like 5 ingredients that go in this dish, and it's very versatile. You could use ground meat in it. You could use pieces of like stew meat or cubed up pork. I think all of those things would work really well. You're just going to want to sear the meat and get it a little brown before you throw it into this soup. So I think any of those types of things would work for this. I don't know about chicken, but I think that most types of like pork or beef would work pretty well in this. And carrots and potatoes and onions are ingredients that I try to keep on hand pretty much all the time, just because you can make a variety of different things with it. Potatoes, you can always make up baked potatoes or mashed potatoes or throw them in soups or stews, and it just is very filling and makes it go a long way. So I do try to keep those 3 things on hand pretty regularly. This particular recipe I also like because it doesn't use any dairy. So a lot of times for like a creamy soup or something like that, the recipes will tell you that you need to add heavy cream or maybe something like a cream cheese, which I don't always have on hand. So I like using the potatoes in this recipe to blend it up and thicken it. I actually have a recipe in one of my cookbooks that is for like a paleo potato soup, and it's very creamy without the use of any dairy products, and that's where I kind of learned that trick from, to just blend up some of the potatoes into the soup, and it makes it much thicker without having to use any dairy. So you could add something like some heavy whipping cream or something like that to thicken it up if you have it and you want to, but I prefer to just use the potatoes since they're already in there anyways. Now I am putting some flour on top of the vegetables. That is another thing that you can do to try and thicken it up, is to put the flour in there. And I'm just kind of coating the vegetables in that and gonna let it get a little bit of a golden brown color before I pour my broth in. That's just another way to thicken up the juice that's in there. But honestly, I think you could probably skip that step and still get a good thick soup at the end just by blending the ingredients up. So you can see here that this doesn't take a whole lot of effort. You just chop up your vegetables, and then I browned my sausage and onions and carrots. I went ahead and put the carrots in with the onions and sausage just so they could start to soften up, and put that flour in there, put the potatoes in, add in my water, and this powder that you see me putting in here, this is actually like a broth powder that I order from Azure Standard. So I think I put in the chicken broth this time. I may have done the beef broth. I can't remember. I use them both interchangeably. But you can see here, this is what it turned out looking like. We ate it with a piece of crusty bread from the no knead bread recipe that I shared a couple weeks back. It goes really well with it. It was a nice filling meal. And now we're going to move on to the next recipe, which is a chicken pot pie. This is something that if you watched my freezer meal prep video that I made before I had my third baby, I actually cooked up a bunch of chicken leg quarters and froze them in the chicken broth. And I mentioned in that video that I like to do that because it makes for a simple way to make a dinner. So I can use that chicken that's already been cooked and shredded in the broth. I can just thaw that jar out, and I can make, like I'm doing right here, a chicken pot pie filling, or I can make something like a white chicken chili. I can add it to gumbo if I'm making gumbo. So I also like to keep my pot pie recipe just simple and straightforward. I start by putting some butter in an oven-safe skillet. I melt it. I put in some diced onion and some frozen mixed vegetables, and I let them cook until they're pretty soft. And then I sprinkle a couple tablespoons of flour on top of it, kind of toss it around in the butter, let that flour start to get a light golden brown, and then I'm going to pour in my shredded cooked chicken with the broth. I really should have added a little more broth to this particular time that I was cooking this, just because I'm going to be topping it with some homemade biscuits instead of a pie crust. If I feel like making homemade pie crust and rolling them out, I will do so, but I really like to just put biscuits on top of my pot pie. I know it's not technically a pot pie at that point, but I can put biscuits on top of it, and it allows me to not even have to take it out of the one skillet that I started in. So it becomes like a one pot, one pan meal whenever I do it this way, versus taking the filling out and transferring it to a pie dish and cooking it, in the pie dish. So I'm using a drop biscuit recipe. I'm just going to mix that dough up. I don't even have to cut it. I'm just going to mix it up. And you can either drop it in little like globs all across the top of the filling, which is what I would recommend doing. This time I thought I would try to kind of smear it across the top and make like a solid piece of biscuit across the top of the pot pie, and it tasted fine, but I wish I would have dropped it in the actual drop biscuit little scoops across the top of it like I normally do. I think the biscuits just would have been fluffier, and this, whenever I smeared it out real thin like this, it got a little tough. So I would recommend, if you're going to try the drop biscuits on top, actually dropping little spoonfuls all across the top of your filling. But I'm mixing that up, and then you'll see me here in just a second struggling to get it to smear across the top of this mixture. And like I mentioned earlier too, I wish I would have put a little more broth in here, just because the biscuit dough tends to kind of soak up some of that liquid. So I wish I would have put just a little bit more liquid in here before I put this topping on it. I don't have a written recipe for the pot pie, but I do have the recipe for the sausage potato soup that I showed at first, and then this drop biscuit dough. So I'll link those down below. But I don't have anything for the pot pie, but it's pretty simple. You just soften your vegetables, put in some chicken broth. I usually do salt, pepper, and garlic powder, onion powder, whatever I'm feeling at that time. And yeah, put my dough on top and then bake it. Okay, the last simple dinner idea I'm going to share with you guys is probably something that you've seen before, but it is a healthier version of the Mississippi pot roast. So instead of using the prepackaged seasoning mixes, I just use whatever spices I have on hand, along with a homemade ranch dressing blend that I make and keep. I like to cook my roast in the Instant Pot, because if my roast is not completely thawed, I can still put it in there in a half frozen state. So if I forget to take my roast out of the freezer in time for it to be completely thawed to put into the oven, I can just go ahead and put it in the Instant Pot, and it will cook just fine in there from a partially frozen state. So I just season up my roast, put some flour on it, put some oil in my Instant Pot, sear it on all sides to get a nice crust on it. And then this is that homemade ranch blend that I was talking about. I'll put a link to it down below if you want to make up a big jar of it. I love having it. I use it so many different ways. So I'm putting that in there along with some water that I'm going to put some of my beef broth powder in with. And then I'll put the pepperoncinis on top along with some of the pepperoncini juice. Cook that up. This time I decided to throw some potatoes in towards the end. So I cooked the roast for a little while, and then I diced up some potatoes to put in there. And that was another super simple dinner that didn't require a lot from me, but it still had all these good ingredients in there, and I was able to, quickly put together another homemade meal for my family. So that's it for this week's video. I hope you guys enjoyed this and that it gave you some inspiration for some simple meals that you can make.